They say the stones of Carvar Manor still remember the sound of teeth breaking bone. The villagers do not go near it, not even in daylight, not even in summer when the wheat fields glow gold beneath the sun. Its gates have rusted shut for over 3 centuries, yet if you press your ear to the iron, you might hear a sound like chewing, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere deep within. I first heard this tale in the winter of 1704, from an old woman who sat hunched beside the tavern fire, her fingers knotted with age, her eyes gleaming like the last embers in the grate. She called her the Blood Countess, though blood was not the only thing she consumed, and in the manner of the cursed, she was not driven by hunger, but by a fear older and darker than death itself, the fear of fading beauty. Her name, recorded in parish registers and sealed court documents, was Countess Ilona. She was born in 1563 to a line already soaked in scandal. Her mother was said to have drowned a maid for wearing her pearls. Her father, a war hero, returned from the Ottoman front with a taste for cruelty so refined that dinner guests whispered their fear he might serve them human flesh as a jest. From childhood, Ilona was told her beauty was her weapon, her shield, her dowry, her only true currency, and she wielded it well. She married a powerful nobleman at 16. By 20, she had inherited his estate, for he had died suddenly. Some claimed from an illness of the stomach, though his body was buried before a physician could speak. Alone in the vast echoing halls of Carvar Manor, Ilona grew obsessed with the fine cracks she imagined at the corners of her mouth, the faint lines she thought she saw beneath her eyes. Servants whispered that she would spend hours before the mirror, lit only by candlelight, staring so long that the wax ran down to puddles on the floor. It was then that the first girl vanished. She was a kitchen maid named Anna, 17, with hair like spun flax. They found her the next morning, lying on the flagstones behind the scullery, her skin pale as chalk, her lips parted as if in surprise. No wound could be seen, yet her hands were clenched tight, and between her fingers, something dark and sticky clung. The priest said it was a sin to speak of it, yet the cook swore she saw the Countess that same night, her lips glistening as if with grease, her eyes fever bright. Soon more girls began to disappear, always young, always healthy, always taken at night when the halls were quiet and the snow fell thick against the shutters. Ilona would emerge in the morning wearing gowns of startling whiteness, her cheeks flushed with a strange, almost luminous bloom, and her skin, the skin that had begun to crease and slacken, seemed as smooth as polished ivory. What no one dared speak aloud was whispered in corners, that she had found a recipe older than alchemy, a ritual born not in kitchens but in tombs, a single strip of flesh carved from the living, still warm, consumed with deliberate slowness before the heartbeat had faded. This, they said, would bind the youth of the victim to the one who devoured it. Perhaps it was a peasant superstition, perhaps, but in the ledger of the manor, the household expenses began to list unusual entries: knives with curved tips, iron clamps, linen for binding, salt in great quantity, and in the winter of 1588, the number of servants on the payroll dropped by almost half. I tell you this as it was told to me, with the smell of smoke in my nostrils, and the snow rattling at the windows, because once you hear of the Countess, you cannot unhear her. She will follow you into your sleep, with her white hands and her mouth red as slaughter. And this, I swear, is only the beginning. The winter after Anna's disappearance was the cruelest in living memory. The Danube froze so thick that cart horses could be driven across it, and in the villages surrounding Carvar Manor, bread became rarer than gold. Yet, within those walls, the Countess's banquets grew more elaborate. Roasted game glistened under honey glaze, spiced wine steamed in silver goblets, and her skin seemed untouched by the years that gnawed at her neighbors. Visitors spoke of her beauty in tones, both awed and uneasy, for her eyes no longer looked merely youthful, they looked sharpened, as if honed by some secret that pressed against the edges of her smile. It was during this winter that Father Benedict arrived. He was a young priest, scarcely 30, sent from Esztergom under the pretext of cataloguing the parish teetites. In truth, the church had received whispers, thin as smoke, of disappearances tied to the Countess. He came armed, not with sword or musket, but with a leather-bound book of canon law and a crucifix worn to dullness. His sermons were quiet, measured, yet his eyes searched the faces of the manor servants like a man counting the living before they, too, slipped into the ledger of the dead. One evening, while the snow fell in sheets, so heavy it erased the horizon, Benedict was invited to dine with the Countess. The great hall was lit by dozens of candles, their flames bending in the draughts that crept from the high, dark corners. The meal began innocuously enough venison bread, a soup thick with root vegetables, but then came a dish unlike any he had seen. It was a small plate, the meat arranged in delicate curls, pale and tender, glistening with a glaze the color of rose petals. The Countess lifted a morsel to her lips with slow precision. "This," she said, "is the rarest meat in the kingdom. It is taken from an animal that is neither beast nor bird, neither hunted nor bred. One must select it carefully." She offered him a taste, her eyes holding his as though daring him to refuse. Benedict hesitated. The scent was faintly sweet, faintly metallic, and in that moment he thought not of animals, but of the human body, of the soft flesh along the inner arm. He set down his fork. Her smile did not falter, but her gaze cooled. "Some men fear the gifts of nature," she said. "Others accept them and are rewarded." In the weeks that followed, Benedict saw signs others pretended not to notice. A smear of blood on the banister, hastily wiped away. A scream in the night, muffled as though by layers of cloth. Servants who avoided his questions, their eyes darting toward the Countess's chambers before they murmured they knew nothing. And always, the scent faint but unmistakably of salt and raw meat lingering in the corridors. Then came the incident with the laundress, Esther. She was barely 16, her laughter bright enough to carry across the courtyard. One morning, Benedict found her standing by the well, pale and shaking, her right arm bound in strips of linen. When he asked what had happened, she whispered, "It was an accident, Father." The shears slipped, but when she turned away, he saw the cloth was soaked through with fresh blood, and beneath it, the shape of her arm seemed altered, as if a piece of it was simply gone. By the end of that winter, 7 more servants had vanished. The Countess dismissed them in her records as having returned to their families, though no families came forward to claim them. The villagers grew restless. Mothers warned their daughters never to accept work at Carvar Manor, yet hunger drove many to ignore such counsel. Benedict began to keep his own ledger. In it, he noted the date each girl arrived, the date she vanished, and any strange occurrences in between. A pattern emerged: each disappearance followed a feast, and each feast followed the arrival of new linen, new knives, and an order for salt. The implication was clear enough to chill the marrow. These were not random acts, they were scheduled. One night, unable to sleep, Benedict wandered the corridors. The manor was a labyrinth of cold stone, its silence broken only by the occasional crack of timber in the walls. As he passed the Countess's chambers, he heard a sound of wet, rhythmic tearing, followed by a low sigh, almost of pleasure. He froze. The sound came again, accompanied by the faint clink of metal on porcelain. He leaned closer to the heavy door, his breath clouding in the cold air, and then he heard her voice, soft and almost tender. "You will never age now, my darling." When the tearing sound resumed, Benedict stepped back, heart pounding. He did not open the door. He told himself it was because he had no proof, because the church required evidence, because one could not accuse a noble without cause. But deep inside, he knew the truth. He feared what he might see, and feared even more that seeing it would make him complicit in a crime so ancient, so profane, that no absolution could wash it away. The snows began to thaw in March, but the air inside Carvar Manor only grew heavier, as if the walls themselves were saturated with something dark and unclean. And Benedict, though he prayed daily, could not shake the sense that he was not here to stop the Countess. He was here to witness her. Spring should have brought relief. The frost melted from the fields, the river began to sing again, and the first green shoots broke through the thawing earth. Yet the land around Carvar Manor seemed immune to the season's mercy. The grass grew patchy and thin, the trees were bare longer than they should have been, and the crozets, black heralds of ruin, lingered in numbers that darkened the sky. By now, Father Benedict's quiet inquiries had not gone unnoticed. The Countess's eyes followed him with a certain feline amusement, as if she were watching a trapped mouse scurry against the bars. Servants who had once smiled at him now kept their distance, their faces shuttered, and the few who spoke did so only to urge him to leave. "This house is hungry," one whispered, eyes darting to the high ceiling, as though the very stones might hear. One market day, Benedict ventured to the village below. The square, once lively with traders, now held a kind of subdued dread. He overheard women muttering about the black coach seen on moonless nights, stopping at cottages with daughters of a certain age. Those who entered it never returned. The village elder, an iron-spined man named, pulled Benedict aside. "We've petitioned the Lord's court," he said, "but she is the court. No summons will touch her." His voice dropped. "You know what she does. We all know. But unless we catch her in the act, she will die of old age before justice comes, and I am not certain she will ever age." That night, Benedict resolved to stay awake. He lit no candles in his chamber and waited, listening to the breathing silence of the manor. It was well past midnight when he heard it, the soft roll of carriage wheels over gravel, the creak of the great front doors, and then a muffled sob. Moving like a shadow, he followed the sound to a side corridor. There, lit by a single guttering torch, stood two of the Countess's guards, dragging a girl by her wrists. She could not have been more than 15, her nightdress torn, her bare feet leaving smears of dirt on the stone. Benedict's first instinct was to rush forward, but a hand closed around his arm. It was Marischka, the head housekeeper, her face drawn and pale. "Don't," she whispered. "You'll only join her." She glanced toward the hall ahead. "If you truly want to stop her, you must see where she goes. Only then will anyone believe you." So he followed at a distance, through winding halls and down a spiral stair that seemed to descend far deeper than the manor's foundations should allow. The air grew damp, carrying the stink of salt and old blood. The torches here were dim, as if reluctant to shed light on what they illuminated. At last they reached a heavy door banded with iron. The guards knocked, and from within came the Countess's voice, warm, inviting. "Bring her in." The door opened just enough for Benedict to glimpse the chamber beyond. It was not a kitchen, though a long table dominated the room, nor was it a chapel, though the walls were hung with tattered banners like funerary shrouds. On the table lay instruments of steel hooks, knives, clamps gleaming wetly in the torchlight, and at the far end, the Countess herself stood in a gown the color of spilled wine, her hair unbound, her hands bare. She approached the girl with the slow, measured grace of a predator. One pale hand cupped the child's face, the other trailed along her arm, fingers pressing as if testing ripeness. Then, with a motion as fluid as it was horrific, she drew a curved blade, and smiling all the while sliced a thin strip from the girl's upper arm. The girl screamed once before a guard's hand clamped over her mouth. Benedict could not breathe. He could only watch as the Countess lifted the strip of flesh to her lips, closed her eyes, and bit down. The sound, wet intimate, was worse than the scream. When she opened her eyes again, they glistened with something far more terrible than hunger. He staggered back into the shadows, his stomach twisting, bile burning his throat. Marischka's hand steadied him. "Now you know," she murmured. "Do you think the bishop will believe you, or will he call it a peasant's tale?" The next day, Benedict confronted the Countess in the great hall. The servants paused in their duties, sensing a shift in the air. "I know what you are," he said, his voice low but steady. "You trade in flesh for youth. You have taken more than lives, you have stolen years, stolen innocence, stolen the very breath from those who served you." She regarded him with the calm of someone utterly secure in her position. "And what will you do, Father?" she asked. "Confess me to your God. He has not stopped me. Denounce me to the court. They dine at my table. You think you are here to end me, but you are here to witness. There must be witnesses, or else the story dies, and I will not have my story die." It was in that moment Benedict understood the depth of her malice. She did not fear death, for she believed it would not come. She feared only obscurity. Her crimes were as much performance as appetite, and she meant for them to echo through centuries. Outside, the crows gathered on the battlements, their wings black against the grey sky. The thaw had come, but in the shadow of Carvar Manor, spring felt very far away, and Benedict, his faith shaken and his purpose twisted into something darker, realized he would have to descend again into that chamber before this was over, perhaps not to save the living, but to ensure the dead were finally heard. The storm began without warning, as if the heavens themselves had been startled awake. Thunder rolled across the hills, shaking loose the long-dead ivy from the manor's crumbling walls. In the village below, windows slammed shut, shutters barred. No one wished to be out after nightfall, on a night like this, not with a Countess's coach known to prowl in the dark. But tonight, the black coach would meet more than fear. Father Benedict had returned to the village that morning, his face pale but his voice steady. In the square, beneath the statue of Saint, he spoke in words he had never imagined himself saying. He told them what he had seen, not rumors, not whispers, but the truth, naked and raw. The chamber beneath the manor, the table of steel, the Countess's lips wet with the blood of her own servant. At first, the crowd's silence felt like disbelief. Then came the murmurs, sharp and bitter, rippling outward like cracks in ice. A woman named Ilona stepped forward, her cheeks hollow, her hands trembling. "My sister," she said. "Last winter, she went to the manor for work. She never came back." Another voice, "My daughter." Then another, and another, until the names became a dirge, a chorus of the vanished. By the time night fell, the village had become a hive of movement. Men sharpened scythes, women filled oil flasks and tore strips of cloth for torches. No one spoke of justice anymore. They spoke of ending it. The ascent to Carvar Manor was lit by those torches, their flames guttering in the rain. Benedict led them, each step heavier than the last. He knew the Countess was expecting him, perhaps even waiting for this moment. But he also knew that to turn back was to condemn the living to join the dead. The gates of the manor stood open, the courtyard empty save for the black coach, its door ajar. Inside, the great hall glowed with candlelight, every sconce lit as though for a feast. And there she was, at the head of the long table, clad in a gown the color of midnight, her hair loose over her shoulders. Before her, a silver goblet steamed faintly. "You've brought guests," she said, her voice warm with mockery. "How thoughtful. The house has been so quiet lately." The villagers surged forward, but Benedict raised a hand. "No more," he said. "It ends here." Her smile did not falter. "Oh, Father, ends are illusions. Stories outlive their tellers. Do you think killing me will erase me? No, you will only carve me deeper into the bone of history." The first torch flew. It struck a tapestry, which bloomed into flame. Then the shouting began. Villagers swarmed the hall, their shadows jerking wildly in the firelight. Guards met them with steel, but they were outnumbered, driven back step by step. The Countess retreated toward the stair, her gown sweeping the blood-slick floor. Benedict followed her into the depths, down the same spiral stair, the air thick with heat and smoke. She reached the iron-banded door and slipped inside. He forced it open in time to see her at the far end of the chamber, her hands pressed against a great stone slab. With a grinding groan, the slab shifted, revealing a narrow passage. She looked back at him, eyes bright. "You could have been part of this, Father. You could have been more than a man." He stepped forward. "Better to be a man than whatever you've become." The Countess's expression hardened. For a heartbeat, she seemed almost human, afraid, cornered. Then the villagers poured into the chamber, their torches flaring. She darted into the passage, but Ilona was faster, slamming the slab shut before she could escape. Trapped, the Countess backed against the wall, the firelight licking her pale face. Benedict spoke once more, not as a priest, but as a witness. "You will be remembered, but not as you wish." They came at her then, not with the swift mercy of a blade, but with the slow, unstoppable weight of a tide. Her screams filled the chamber, high and furious, until they broke into ragged sobs, then silence. The torches hissed as the heat began to consume the tapestries, the wooden beams, the very air. When Benedict stumbled from the burning manor into the storm, the sky to the east was paling. The crows wheeled overhead, their cries carrying over the crackle of fire. Behind him, the towers of Carvar sagged and split, the black coach collapsing into embers. The village would rebuild, life would creep back into the fields. But the memory of that night, of her voice, her eyes, her hunger would not fade. Benedict knew it would not fade in him, and perhaps that was her final victory, that even in death, she would haunt them. In the years that followed, travelers told of a ruin on the hill, where no grass grew and no bird nested. They spoke of the Countess who had eaten the flesh of her own servants to remain young, and of the night the villagers rose against her. Some said her bones lay buried under the stones, others claimed her body was never found. And when the wind blew from the north, carrying the faintest scent of salt and iron, the old ones would close their shutters and whisper, "The house remembers, and it is still hungry."